This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture.
It's great to be here again for another episode of Winning Through Culture. Amanda and I are excited to be here today with Rob McKinnon. Rob is an author, speaker, and leadership coach and consultant to C-level executives all across the United States. Rob and I have a long relationship going back almost, now 25 plus years. So we've known each other a long time. And part of what we'll talk about today is some of the work we've done with Rob and his organization. But Rob, welcome, and thanks for being here on another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Thanks, Tim. Fun to be with you on this.
It's good to be together. And this episode is a part of our purpose series that Amanda and I have been working on. And we specifically are focused today on the leader in the purpose equation. So a place to start, you've written a book. We're going to talk about that book today. That's part of the program that you do in your coaching with your organization, your team. But let's kind of start out with one of the premises of the book, which is lead like you were meant to. The whole idea behind role and identity. So in the book, you emphasize the difference between those two things. So maybe why don't we start with setting the table as to when we speak of role and identity in a leader, what are we specifically referring to?
Okay, good. And I feel like I need to kind of zero in on that, give a little bit of the context that we find that in. As you know, I've talked at length with you, and this is the framework that we work with of recognizing that all of us are showing up in 4 dimensions. We're showing up in our physical bodies. We're showing up with our intellectual thoughts. We're showing up with our emotions and our feelings. And then the way I picture it, deep underneath all 3 of those is what we label the spiritual dimension. And so it's inside this spiritual dimension. A lot of people immediately go to religion. And if you have a faith, it absolutely colors the spiritual dimension. But the 4 components that I identify that I think are in each of our spiritual dimensions are, number 1, my identity. Who am I? Number 2, my purpose. Why am I here? 3, my beliefs. What do I believe? And finally, my values. What do I want? So identity is the first of those that's in that spiritual core. So distinguishing between my identity and the roles I play, I would say that identity is who I am, or roles represent what I do. I'm one person, but one of my roles is husband to Marta. Another role is parents to now adult kids, Ellie and Will and their spouses. Another role I have is friend. Another role that I have, and where we've interacted a lot lately, is as coach. But all those different roles should coalesce in the core identity of who I am. And that should be pretty authentic no matter who I'm with, whether it's Marta or you or other friends. That identity should be consistent. And just to talk a little bit further, okay, identity, all these things in the spiritual realm can be kind of nebulous and soft. And what are we really talking about? I think the example I'm thinking of is this last weekend, I was up in Washington, D.C. with a dear friend, also of about 20 years or so. And we were celebrating his 60th birthday. And it was just a great, fun, beautiful evening, good food, good wine, a lot of laughter. But before we wrapped up, each of the 8 other guys that were there with me, with this dear friend, Claude, we took a moment to just tell Claude what he represented in our lives. And I used the words strong, wise, and gentle. And I wish you knew this friend, Claude, but those words, to me, captured his identity with me. Now, he's a very powerful attorney in D.C. He's prosecuted and sent people to jail and stuff like that. But that notion of identity as strong, wise, and gentle, I would say I've seen manifested across his life. Does that help distinguish between role and identity?
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. No, I think it's an important distinction to make as we jump into this.
Well, and I think it's important because that is crucial for leaders. And we've had a chance, Rob, I've been through one of your workshops and had some additional context around this. So, for the listeners of the podcast, we talk about the importance that leaders understand their identity being separate from their role. Can you talk a little bit more about some other examples, maybe where you've coached leaders, where they're either seeing them as one or they do have a good understanding of how those two separately show up in their leadership style?
Yes, I can. I can think of a company that brought in a leader, this leader, and they named him CEO. And he came in with a great pedigree of places where he had worked and leaders he had worked for, names which you would recognize. But not long after he was in this new role, he gained a reputation for his reports. And by that, I mean the reports that he demanded from his subordinates and the reports that he would show the board. And these reports were often color coded with red, yellow, and green to indicate the status of different objectives the company was working on. Not unusual to do that. But here's the problem. While he was known for his good looking reports, he also developed a reputation for not really getting things done. His reports were slick, he was political, but execution was not happening, and he didn't last very long as a CEO. Today, he's a chief marketing officer. Chief marketing officers are all about how you show up and how you present things, and you present things that look really good and convince people to do things. That's probably a much more appropriate role for him to be in, given his identity of presentation and selling people, than it was as CEO of this company.
It's a great example, actually. I think it gets to the crux of some of the conversations we've had around purpose, because everybody's identity is ultimately rooted in whatever they feel their sense of purpose is. It's easy, the old adage, right people, right seats. It's easy to get somebody that clearly has an identity and a purpose in life, put them in the wrong seat, and you're going to have a situation like that, but get them in the right seat and they're going to thrive. So I think that's a great example. Let's pivot to the book, if we could, Rob, because it's, as I mentioned in the opening comments, we have worked with you in full disclosure in your team. And I could genuinely say, having worked with a variety of different business coaches over my years, you guys have a very unique and powerful process that really kind of gets to the heart of a leader. And as you said, the four dimensions. So both physical, spiritual, mental, and emotional. But the book, Lead Like You Were Meant to, what inspired you to write the book?
Well, first of all, I would say it took me 10 years to write the book. I started off in one direction and figured out a few things and went in some new directions. But I would say, Tim, we coach out of our own journey. I've said that to you. And I began writing the book in my early 40s. So what often happens to a lot of men or women when they hit their early to mid 40s?
Well, yeah.
We call it a midlife crisis, different terms, but they begin to come to terms with who they are and where they are in life. I would tell you that I had been thinking about leadership ever since high school and the importance of being a leader. And I studied that. I took that through college. I was an Army officer for 4.5 years over in Europe. And I thought my destiny was to be the big guy, to ultimately carry the CEO title. I thought that's what I was chasing. And I would say that I was chasing it, though, more out of, if I got there, I would be esteemed, I would be looked up to. So I was chasing the title, but kind of ignoring who I was. And in my early 40s, after having read a lot of other books about how to be a good leader, and the implied message with a lot of those books is, read this book and you can become the leader everybody wants you to be. I found I was humbled through a series of experiences to take a really good look at myself. And when I quieted down and did that and got honest, I recognized that my role was more to be walking alongside leaders like you, Tim. I would tell you that some of the leaders, pretty much all the leaders I work with, I could never do what they do. I could never be as effective as they are. And I mostly work with CEOs and presidents. Our organizations works with top executives in companies, but I could never do that. But what I did learn about myself and my presence and my true identity was that I could quietly walk alongside a leader like you, ask good questions, and help you be a better version of yourself. So all of that brought me around to leaders are going to be at their best when they're leading according to who they are, not trying to be someone else. So hence the title, Lead Like You Were Meant to. And that takes work to figure out how was I meant to lead.
And Rob, is your goal with those who take in the content of your book really for them to have that opportunity to take that quiet moment and figure out a way for, as your title suggests, right, for them to lead like they were meant to, like their own guiding principles are helping them come to terms with where they are and ultimately how they want to show up, the presence that you were discussing? What is the hope that you get when you think about those that are consuming your book? What are you wanting them to walk away with?
Well, I'm wanting them to use it. Hopefully, it's provocative to get them to look within themselves. And again, this is an opening premise of, a belief that I have of if we're not leading ourselves well, we're not going to lead other people well. And what does it mean to lead myself well? Well, that means, in order to lead your organization well, you have to know your organization. You have to know its strengths and its weaknesses and where it needs work and where it needs change. The same exercise goes on within myself of knowing myself well, truly knowing my strengths and weaknesses and where there is opportunity to grow and change. The book is going to get you so far with that. We can talk about this a little bit further, but the book is a tool along with the coaching that we do to be having a conversation, ultimately probably with somebody else, where you go through this process of exploration and understanding yourself and then make some commitments to lead differently and lead more out of who you truly are.
Self-awareness, which is in essence part of what you're discussing there, Rob, is a theme that comes up often or has on our podcast and our day-to-day lives. What are some of the practical steps a leader can do to really develop that self-awareness?
Yeah, good question. And 2/3 of my book is under the heading of self-awareness. I talk about 3 steps. First, be aware, but you got to keep being aware. There is more, much more to be aware of. Tim, you and I probably experienced this some where you would see some things and I would encourage you, keep looking.
Yep.
Keep looking. There's more.
Think deeper.
What was your temptation? Your temptation as the leader that you are, and this is the temptation with all the top leaders I work with, is they see one thing and they start working on that. And that's where I push and say, there's more. There's more. Let's keep looking. So 2/3 of the book is about self-awareness. And then the last third is about the last 2 steps of assess. You're aware of these things. Okay, assess, give yourself a score. And then what's the adjustment you want to make? But let's remember the very first thing that has to come so that you can really be self-aware is you've got to turn off autopilot.
I was just going to say, I think you need to elaborate on autopilot. That's one of the big things that I took away from our time together.
Thank you. Thank you. And the subtitle of the book is Make the Shift from Autopilot to Intentional. All 3 of us have already used autopilot today. Autopilot is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what we use to get ourselves out of bed in the morning and go through our morning rituals that get us ready for the day. Autopilot is not bad, but autopilot does not help us if we are wanting to identify opportunities for growth or change. And so the big thing is we have to catch ourselves on autopilot. We have to catch ourselves just rolling ahead and not being very focused, not really noticing all that there is to notice, beginning with myself, beginning with noticing my autopilot thoughts, my thoughts, about you all, my thoughts about the topic we're talking about, my thoughts about myself. my thoughts about what it means to, do well on a podcast. I have to notice my emotions. If there's a little bit of fear creeping in there that I won't perform well, if there's a little bit of frustration because, I don't know, struggling with the technology, or there's a little bit of self-consciousness of, oh, will I be one of their best guests? All of those things are room for autopilot. We have to turn that off and then take a really good, honest look at things. And even as I said that, you notice I slowed down, because that's what we have to do to turn off autopilot and really begin noticing more.
What do you find are some other challenges that leaders face when they're trying to lead? Like after they've done the work, they have that self-awareness, at least in some capacity. It might not be 100% all the time. They might still be working on turning off and turning on autopilot in certain scenarios. But when leaders are trying to really be authentic, they've found their purpose, they're trying to lead in that very vulnerable way, because I think that those two things go together. What are some of those challenges that you see in the coaching relationships that you've explored that leaders truly face?
The biggest challenge is taking the risk of changing. We all say we're all about growth. Well, growth means change. Growth means different tomorrow from yesterday. We all enthusiastically say, oh, we're all about that. But the reality is, we love our comfortable little habits. We love our comfortable little ways that we order our world so that we'll be comfortable. And so, again, that's true for me. It's true for you. And especially when we've lived a long time this way, we've lived a long time viewing the world the way we view it and viewing ourselves in it and how we think we need to be in it. So the big challenge you're asking about, when leaders get a better connection with who they really want to be, who they authentically are, is being intentional and not letting the world and its expectations, not letting themselves be a reaction to that. In other words, not being a reaction to the outside world, but instead to check in with myself. Okay, who do I want to be in this moment? What do I want my presence to represent? And how can I go from the inside out, regardless of what's going on in the world around me, regardless of whether there are frowns or smiles on the faces of the people in front of me? So it's pausing to do that. It's taking risks. And then the third thing is just repetition, repetition, repetition. You go to the gym to strengthen muscles. The first day you go to the gym, you're really just sore, but you haven't really grown your muscles very much. But you're in there for 2 months. Now you're starting to see some difference. And so it's repetition of pausing and taking risks to do it differently. And that's how we strengthen those muscles and go in a new direction.
I was listening, or actually reading, a study this morning, and it was interesting because it talked about, the short story is I tripped into a Bible study for teenagers. But so it was from an organization that I like, and it looked interesting, but I realized on day 2, this was written for teenagers. But what was interesting about it is today they talked about the fact that, if you're in middle school, just when you kind of get that figured out, you get to start over and go to high school. And when you're in high school, just when you get that figured out, you get to start over and go to college. And then when you go to college and get that figured out, you get to start over and go to be an adult, or hopefully go to be an adult. And as I was listening to you, Rob, that hit me, because I think that is so true for myself and for other leaders I see, is that you want to grow, but growth requires change. Growth requires being uncomfortable. Growth requires intentionality, being off autopilot. And a lot of times it requires starting over. And again, it becomes a matter of what you define as starting over. It doesn't mean you threw away your high school years in order to go to college. They just became the foundation for the next level. So maybe with that as a backdrop, I am curious, when you think about a leader that's growing, what are some of those pivotal moments of graduating from middle school to high school to college to life? Are there any that you've seen patterns of in your time?
Oh, yeah. The pattern is my formula: E plus E equals E. And the three E's are event plus emotion lead to explanation. And again, this happened for each of the three of us. And this is part of the work that we do in our coaching work with leaders, is help them to see where these patterns were formed at the ripe old age of 8, 10, 11 years old. And we've kind of been following that pattern ever since. Just very quickly, I know you all both know it, but just for our listeners, significant event or series of events that happened in your formative years. Again, a lot of this is before even age 10 or 12 or 15. A significant event or series of events. Anyone looking at that now, and you looking at it now objectively, again, we didn't discern this at the time because we barely knew what emotions were, but that event or series of event would have carried a lot of emotion with it, either a really good feeling or a really negative feeling. It either made you really happy or it made you really angry, really scared, really ashamed. E plus E leads to E. So event plus emotion leads to explanation. Your explanation, my explanation at that young age was either I really like that feeling and I want more of that. The people were applauding me. My dad told me he was proud of me. My coach told me I was a role model for the team. I want more of that. Therefore, my explanation is I'm going to figure out how to do more of the things that will help me have that good feeling again. That happened for some of us. For a lot of the rest of us, it was a very negative feeling. It was a feeling where we were put down, where we were hindered, where we were, subjected to some really ugly stuff. And we said, I never want to experience that again. Therefore, my explanation is I will begin behaving and acting and pursuing these kinds of things so that I never have to experience that before. And that's what's showing up every day in the halls of your office, every day in the conference room. When people come together, manifestations of that are showing up. Now, I need to be quick to add, out of that, we gained some of our greatest strengths, some of the things that really help us succeed in life, because we were trying to figure out how to succeed in life. That's that explanation we were looking for. But unfortunately, what also came with that, the shiny good thing, the shiny good strength, on the backside of that great strength is a great weakness and a shadow and things that undermine who we are with others and kind of squander some of our leadership effectiveness. If we don't understand all that, we have no opportunity to now, with the benefit of wisdom and years, to choose how to behave in some different ways that are not just an acting out of who we were when we were 8 or 10 or 11.
Well, and I think an important note that you brought up is that every individual is bringing that part of themselves to, especially if you have an organization where you encourage them to bring them authentically, right? They're bringing their whole selves to work, whether they know it or not. Sometimes we try to put up a shield or you overcompensate in some way, shape, or form. But every person that's coming into the space of work is carrying that with them. And I think that leads, and you had shared this previously, but I think that leads to some assumptions on other people's behalf, because some people are going to be at a different stage in their self-awareness journey where they might have done this work. They're very self-aware. They understand. They take that quiet moment to think about, who am I? How do I want to show up in this moment? And then have the conversation, have the reaction, versus the opposite can be true for some as well. And you had just kind of talked about, like, what is the antidote to those assumptions? So maybe can you talk a little bit about how you encourage people when assumptions are creeping in about yourself or about others, how you work through that as a leader or as a teammate?
Yeah, this is a good one. Thanks, Amanda. The antidote for assumptions is curiosity. Assumptions, by the way, are like autopilot. We are using them all the time. We have to use them. we have to use them. Leaders have to use assumptions because leaders rarely have 100% complete and accurate information about a person or about their motivations or just about information. So we're in the habit of using assumptions all the time. The problem comes when we start making them about our coworkers, our team members. And so the antidote is to ask questions rather than to just charge blindly and on autopilot forward with our assumption. And a great way to ask the question is to position it like this. The story in my head is that you were maybe not as prepared for this meeting as you would have liked to be, but I'm curious as to where you are on that. Let me ask that differently. I have an assumption that you're frustrated over what we've just talked about. I'm curious as to how you're feeling about the topic we just talked about. And so you're saying it's a story in my head. So you're owning it and you're acknowledging it's a story. It may or may not be true, but then you're inviting the other person to hopefully speak the truth of what they know about that instead of you just charging ahead blindly, having labeled them, this certain negative way.
Oh, the stories in our head. Yeah. Well, and I think to your point about curiosity, it's, you get into a situation as a leader, and even if you are self-aware, it's easy to say that I've got this story, so that story must be true. So if that story is true, then this is true, then that's true, and then this is who you are, where you are right now. And if you jump to that conclusion, clearly that can create some challenging relationship dynamics. I am curious, no pun intended, when you use curiosity as a leader, what do you see as kind of the positive outcomes for the leader and whomever they're working with? Could be another leader for that matter.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we work on this within organizations all the time because the better leaders do at humbly asking genuinely curious questions. I think the model for curious questions is whoever that's a toddler in your life that's walking around. They're a blank canvas. They don't have it figured out, and they're just wanting to know. And so often leaders will think they are asking curious questions, but they're really rhetorical questions, or they're guiding questions to get you to where I'm thinking. But it takes real practice. And again, we help leaders with this, and just in terms of the types of questions you ask and what you do after you've asked the first question, you actually keep asking questions and stay curious. When someone else detects that you're really curious to know what's going on inside them, hopefully they will begin to open up and you will start getting to a level of truth and trust in your working relationship that will improve how you work with one another.
I can genuinely say, Rob, one of the leaders in our organization that's worked with your organization uses this technique with me. It's been very fascinating, but we've worked together a long time. We had an unbelievable conversation yesterday that started with, I am curious, when you do X, why are you doing that? Which led us down a path of a couple more questions. And truthfully, we discovered, it was kind of shocking to me that as long as we had worked together, we had never really spoken of, from a leadership style perspective in particular, why I did things one way and saw the world through that lens, and why they did things very different way through a different lens. And I guess at some level we were aware of that, but we had never really spoken of it. And, since we did yesterday afternoon, and since then it's like, oh, now I get it. And it kind of gives us a whole new basis. That was kind of my original question is, you build on those layers of the previous experiences. And I think this whole idea of curiosity, and to your point, not a leading question, not an assumptive statement, but a true wow, that is curious. Can you help me understand that? Really opens up some pretty amazing discoveries.
Yeah. And I would say it's also critical, back on this topic of identity, we have to be curious with ourselves. Again, when we're on autopilot and when we're making assumptions, I so often hear leaders before they begin working with us just saying, that's just the way I am. And I like to encourage them to add 3 magic words to that, up until today. And again, our process and coaching is designed to help you to take a look at yourself in a way you haven't before. Amanda, you experienced this with the workshop. Tim, you've experienced it with our work. But wasn't there an opportunity for you to get curious about some of your autopilot ways of behaving? And when you do that, it can lead you to some new places where you can say, boy, I don't want that to be my autopilot way of behaving. But I got to get curious as to why that is such a habit. And by doing that with ourselves, we can gain a clearer understanding of who we are. And that then helps us make the shift from autopilot to intentional about being more intentionally who we want to be.
Well, and through the workshop, I mean, we had the opportunity to kind of talk, and I'm going to call it a do-over. That might not be the right word that
Yeah.
right? Like we have those, I mean, I don't even want to count the number that I'm like, oh, I wish I could have done that over or in a day. I'm sure they add up day over day, week over week, year over year. But the concept, right, is that you're self-aware enough as a leader to say, that should have probably been a do-over. So you're acknowledging that maybe that didn't go the best, whether that be for you or the person you interacted with. So you're having that awareness. You can then have that reflection time with yourself, assess where you were in the dimensions. And again, please read the book. I think it will be extremely enlightening, but assess where you are and then ultimately having the opportunity to adjust. So you get to have that internal dialogue with yourself following a very prescriptive framework. And Tim referenced, we have several individuals in our organization, as everybody knows who listens to this podcast, we use our daily lives to talk about on winning through culture. So we have all experienced in different ways the ways that these tools and techniques can help us show up as better, and I'm just going to say better humans for each other. Because at the end of it, when you're thinking about building an intentional, impactful culture, whether you are the CEO, you're the president, you're a team lead, you're a manager, I don't care what title you have, we want to be thoughtful and respectful humans to each other. So if you can just acknowledge that every situation is not going to go perfect, you have the opportunity to have a do-over. And now you can use some of these techniques to actually approach that conversation well. I do think help you in structuring an environment that leads to everyone authentically leading, right? Leading from their sense of purpose. And ultimately, there's some greater connection to the organization because otherwise they wouldn't be a leader if they didn't believe in what the mission was. So it's a shameless plug, I guess, but I really do think it's helpful.
And hopefully it leads to less do-overs in the future.
I know, right? I hope so too. I haven't had so many since the workshop, but I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of it now.
It's gradual.
Yeah, very true.
Well, I think the virtue of kind of recognizing when you are having one, you start to realize in the moment before you get down the path that you might be doing something again that's going to require a do-over. I mean, I'd say that's one of the main takeaways I've got back to your formula of E plus E equals E is once you're aware, you can start to sense a moment coming upon you. And I know for me, the trigger tends to be more of a conversation that hits me on something around my personal values that doesn't seem right. And it's just a chain of events that ultimately, if I'm not careful, will just lead me to an unproductive place, both personally and in the conversation. So I think that awareness, which is discussed, like I said earlier, often cannot be underestimated. But it's not just the awareness to something you said, Rob, which is this is just the way I am. It's the awareness that leads to, okay, I am having this experience. I am feeling a shortness of breath. I am feeling my physical nature changing. I'm headed down a path where the emotions and the experience are leading me to ultimately an outcome that may or may not be what I'm looking for or what is going to be helpful to me as a leader.
Yeah.
When you think about purpose, again, having worked with you and your team, I see this, but how do you connect all of this to one's purpose as a leader and an individual?
Yeah, good question, especially with everything we've talked about around identity. I think that when you better know who you are, who you really are, and in some cases, we want to make adjustments there. We're not very happy with who we are. I was thinking about, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, think about going into a room full of coworkers and think about these labels we put on people. We bestow their identity on them. We say, let's be on the nice side. He's quiet but wise, or she's a curious listener, or he's a really strong presence. He's a fighter. We're bestowing identity on people. But then think about these others that we also use. He's a bully. She's a people pleaser. He's a know it all. She's a talker. Think about if that's your identity. When you better understand who you are, remember, identity is who I am, purpose is why I'm here. And I think that we gain understanding of purpose out of how we were designed identity wise. And again, that aligns. I write in the book about this dilemma I was having with my own identity in my early years of coaching. I've been at it for 20 years now, but I was having it was a very difficult season. And I was on a walk with Marta one day, and she goes, "Well, who are you with your clients?" And I go, "Well, I'm a confidant, I'm an advisor, and I'm an encourager." Those three words just rolled out. And guess what I've learned in the past 17 years since I first figured that out? Those help me be a good coach. So there you have purpose coming out of identity. When I understand confidant, encourager, advisor, that's not leader. That's not leading the charge, but that's walking alongside the leaders that do. And so those two are definitely connected, but I think a lot of it begins with understanding who I am or who I aspire to be, and then out of that comes purpose. And who you aspire to be, let me just give you this real quickly, because our world, and Americans especially, when you have, why did Facebook blow up here and just take off? Why do we have all this image building on LinkedIn and all these, and these things are fine, they're fine. But we do a lot of projecting out to the world who we want to be because we think the world wants that. That is not finding your true identity. That is finding an identity that aligns with what you think other people want you to be. But when we can do the hard work, the quiet work, understanding from within who we are, who we want to be, then we will be on a better track of living that out with purpose.
Well, and I think to your point is, who are you when no one's looking or watching? Like, what is your action in that moment? And Tim probably might not even remember this. This was years ago. There was a group of us. We were in Nashville for a conference, and there was a group who had gone to a particular restaurant kind of gathering area. And there was an individual who was hungry and also was experiencing some other plights in their life and had approached our group. And Tim actually took that person aside and got their order because they knew where we were. And he went up, he purchased the items that this person asked for and brought them back and didn't say anything about it. It was just, that was his immediate. And I don't know if you remember that, Tim, at all, but that was his.
I don't even remember that. Yeah.
Exactly. But that was him. You know what I mean? That is part of Tim's identity. And it stuck with me. That was years ago. That was 7 years ago now. And so it was autopilot in the best way. He didn't think anything about it. It was just an attunement to that person and what they needed at the time. And that's just cool. It's like we were all there, but nobody was watching, but everybody was watching. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so those small instances really help, I think, clarify who someone is at their core.
So, Amanda, what's one word that would be one word, you would ascribe as part of Tim's identity? What did that moment represent in terms of who he is as a person?
I could pick so many words, but thoughtful. I say this to him all the time, and I'm sure that others have too, but Tim makes you feel like you're the only person and most important person in the room or in the conversation. And he did that for that individual.
Yeah. So great.
Yeah.
I agree. There you go, Tim. There's one of your words for your identity.
That's right. Add that.
Well, I think that I would say the work that your coaching process does. Having, again, said this earlier, there's lots of different ways, but I know for me, it's been extremely helpful for me to separate the identity that I thought I had to have to the clarity of identity of who I actually am. That's an interesting place as a leader.
Well said. Yeah.
A very interesting place as a leader, because I think to a certain extent, there are certain things you convince yourself of about your identity to help you be successful in your role, that if you start to peel some of that back, you reveal the gold, if you will, of your true identity. And how does that show up in your role? Back to your earlier story about somebody that sat in a CEO seat and really belonged in a chief marketing seat. Same person, same skills, but they were put in a seat where it was all about execution because of whatever their pedigree, their background, they could sell themselves. And what their true identity was, their hardwiring was a person that better sat in the seat of the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. So I think that's another very fascinating aspect of both your book and process, is be careful what you ask for as a leader when you really try and go down this journey and this path, because you're going to learn a few things. And that doesn't mean you cannot pivot, change. I think that's the magic of leadership, is everything is a canvas to be painted.
Yeah. This may sound like kind of a soft topic, maybe a nice to do at some point. Tim, you know that our coaching work took us directly there. And it did so because it is necessary right now for you to have greater clarity on that. The leaders that don't do this work, there is a constant tension within you. And see if you would identify with this, Tim. There's a constant tension going on with you. You're questioning yourself. You have an inability to relax because you think you need to perform all the time. You're overly self-conscious. You're agitated, frustrated. And all of that stuff is just an energy suck to manage between thinking you need to be one person when really your true identity is a different person. When you do this work, and it's all about the inside game, there's going to be less internal fighting within yourself. You're going to become more relaxed, more self-confident, and better able to manage stress and anxiety without getting triggered or acting out. That is the very practical reason we are talking about leaders getting clear about their identity here. It has day-to-day ramifications on your energy and your performance and your presence as a leader.
Well, I mean, it is often referred to as the soft stuff, but that is the hard stuff. And it's not for everybody. You know, the truth is, to your point, Rob, there's a whole segment of our society that is projecting an image through different means as to who they want to be, with no awareness of who they actually are. And I'm not at all saying there's anything wrong with that. I am just identifying the reality that there's a choice that you can say, you know what, I want to peel the layers of this person I am back and really truly understand this, because it ultimately leads, the intersection of purpose here leads to what are your gifts? And those gifts also lead to what is the shadow side of those gifts in your leadership. So I would say that, maybe called the soft stuff. I'd say it's the hard stuff. The easy way, I got an old saying, the hard way becomes the easy way. The easy way becomes the hard way. The easy way is to not go there. It's to just say, this is the identity. This is the role. This is who I want to be. This is the identity that I need to adopt to be that leader. And so that's what I'm going to do. And lose yourself in that. And there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong. I just, as a leader, chose a different path. And I wanted my team to have the opportunity to explore that path for themselves.
I agree with everything Where I would say is it is fine in a social setting and in your personal life to roll with two different identities. Go ahead, let that work out however it's going to work out for you. But the leaders who the outside image truly reflects the inside identity, there's authenticity there. The video matches the audio. And that is what inspires people to really follow you. And they'll follow you through a brick wall. They'll follow you over the mountain. They'll follow you no matter what, because they trust you. When the outside image and the inside identity don't line up, you are less trustworthy as a leader. And you'll get people to follow you so far just because of your title and their title. But at the end of the day, they won't be all in with you, and you won't be getting all that you could get as a leader. So again, that's one of the reasons that makes this not just nice to know stuff for me as a coach with leaders. It is absolutely essential to get the best out of leadership.
Well, the world is definitely in need of great leadership at every level right now. So, in our Winning Through Culture podcast series, which focuses on business owners and entrepreneurs, and certainly businesses, great leaders create great organizations, which really is a sum total of people showing up and achieving their own greatness in whatever that business is. So I certainly appreciate the work you and your team have dedicated to your craft and the work that you're doing. And again, the soft stuff is the hard stuff, and it's worth all of the work to get there.
Agreed.
Well, Rob, it's been great to have you on our podcast, Winning Through Culture. We really appreciate you helping us unpack this idea of role and identity, the intersection with purpose, sharing with us some very practical elements of not only your book, but the work you do. We'll have in the show notes a little bit more about McKinnon leadership and how to get in touch with you. I would definitely suggest to any leader that's truly willing and desires to do, again, the hard work, to be that authentic leader that's the same on the inside as the outside and really be powerful, to get in touch with Rob and his team and explore what it might look like to lead like you were meant to.
Great, Tim. Thanks. Great to be with you. You know that the coaching relationship is a partnership. The coach has his or her role and the leader has their role. So it's a great partnership. I would also mention that besides the book, there are other online resources at robmckinnon.com under the book, and specifically in this area of working on identity. So those are available as well. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yes, thank you for being a returning guest.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful,
because your culture matters.